My conversation today is with Dr. Justin Sledge, professor and host of the Esoterica YouTube channel. Dr. Sledge's work has been a driving engine behind the popularization of the occult via academic channels to digital demographics, and his show has even been inspiration for my own documentary-style presentations on the Arcanum channel. He is one of the most watched content creators in the genres of occult, magic, and the esoteric. I sat down with Dr. Sledge to discuss some of his latest work on the Esoterica channel, religious identity and the esoteric traditions, the subject of belief in the study and practice of occultism and magic, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. All right, Dr. Justin Sledge, this is fantastic. I'm so happy that you're joining me today. I really appreciate it. I want to say I have a feeling this is going to be a great discussion, and I do have quite a bit of respect for the work that you've done and that you continue to do through the Esoterica channel. I think the first thing I want to start off with, it might be interesting to talk a little bit about what drew you to the arcane subjects.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Ike, for having me on. I really appreciate being on the podcast. It's a very prestigious list of people that you've chatted with, and so to be on that list is a great honor. So thank you for having me on. So I think basically the way that I got into a lot of this, and there's sort of a couple different streams, but the big thing was I grew up on a lot of shows like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and Leonard Nimoy's In Search of, and Unsolved Mysteries. So I still get spooked out when I see Robert Stack walking out of the mist in his trench coat. So I grew up on a lot of shows like that, and I think what ended up happening was I just became interested in topics that are sort of arcane, Atlantis or ghosts or Bigfoot or whatever. And I maintained that interest for quite some time, but and I think there's kind of two ways this typically happens with people. Is as you get older, either you lose interest and you quit believing in those kinds of things, or you've got to go whole hog and you believe in all of it. You never meet the person who's just like they only believe in Atlantis or something. And so what ended up happening was I ended up growing up, and I became skeptical of this material, but I maintained an interest. And of course, the only place to foster that kind of attitude, where one is sympathetic and interested, but also critical, is in the academy. And so, after I got after I got my undergraduate degree in religion and philosophy, I kind of had to figure out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to study as my academic specialty. And the Amsterdam program, studying Hermetic philosophy, seemed like a really, at least, interesting speed bump on the way to a PhD in philosophy. And so I decided to go to Amsterdam and study Hermetic philosophy there. And I've been interested in this material ever since. So, but then I went on and got a normal, boring, normie PhD in philosophy. But I maintained an interest in this material, and ultimately that led me to starting Esoterica.
Yeah, so that was my next question. Actually, was the I guess explicit inspiration behind the starting your channel. I imagine that you find, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that you would find maybe a degree of freedom in being able to produce and publish your own content outside of it's YouTube. It's a worldwide community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, one of the great things about YouTube, and one of the terrible things about YouTube, is that it's you can upload whatever you want to that beast, and there's all kinds of great stuff, and there's all kinds of rubbish, as I'm sure everyone knows. And so yeah, it is great in that sense that to kind of be my own boss, and I can talk about what I want to talk about. And if I get a wild hair and want to make an episode on the therapeutai, I can do that. That's what I did this week. So so that is nice. And also it's just an outlet for me to do education. Teaching is really my calling. I've been an educator for many years. And unfortunately, there is no religious studies department where I teach. And so I don't get to teach this material. So there is no opportunity outside of Esoterica for me to actually share this information with people. It's unique. It's uniquely reserved, I guess, in this case for YouTube. But otherwise, if you were to take a university level class with me, it would be history of political philosophy, intro ethics, intro metaphysics, stuff like that. And that's the kind of stuff that I have to teach, at the university. So it is nice that I have the latitude to, to really delve into what is really my academic specialty here on YouTube.
Yeah, and the as you were saying before, kind of going whole hog into really leaning into the things that you're interested in. And I think finding fertile ground in some sense, talking about it as kind of like this maybe off-road trajectory, a little detour through Hermetic philosophy. I've found that it will bolster that flame of passion. The little bit of encouragement and engagement that you get will be able to sort of further ignite your interest in that stuff. And so it's interesting to me that you take a situation where it's like, you're teaching something I'm sure that you are interested in, but then there's this lack of venue for something that you're really passionate about. And instead of just saying, well, I'm going to suck it up, you kind of made lemonade here for everyone, because I will say, basically, I mean, your channel is like kind of like the archetype for stuff that I do and many, many others in this milieu. You were kind of the first to do it and be successful with it and raise that production quality. So that's we have a lot of thanks to give for that sort of indomitable need to sort of get this stuff out there and teach it.
Yeah, and to be sure, I certainly wasn't the first to really do this. Angela Puka has her channel is older than mine. Dana Trell, the modern hermeticist, is also out there doing really great work. Can't forget Earl Fontenelle on the Schwepp podcast. So, but it's really great to be able to be a member of that community. And again, I can thank my brother actually for urging me to finally start the YouTube channel. I was very hesitant to do it for quite some time, and eventually it really was my brother. It's like, no, man, you need to buck up and do this. It's gonna work. He was quite confident, and ultimately he seems to have been right.
So I think your latest video on the channel was on Hildegard von Bingen and her mystical language. That's something that's been really fascinating for me as a ceremonialist and someone particularly coming up through the Golden Dawn tradition. That idea of a primordial sort of divine creative language, and either being on the quest to discover it or to kind of make one. There's all sorts of implications of cryptography in there and ciphers. Obviously, John Dee and the Angelica language, Falconelli's references to the language of the birds and stuff like that. What do you think all of that kind of hints towards? Like, is there a common denominator that you found in your study to the ideologies of people who have kind of pursued, sometimes with great labor, those kinds of concepts of language?
I think it's a basically pre-modern conception of the relationship of language and ontology. Since Ferdinand de Saussure, modern linguistics takes it as arbitrary, the relationship between sign and signifier. It doesn't really matter what language you use. All languages are equally arbitrary if you want to denote a term like dog or three or whatever. And so that's a very modern conception of how language relates to being. That's nothing like pre-modern people understood the relationship of language to being, especially in the sort of larger world of Judeo-Christian Islamic theology, where God operates through speech. And insofar as God creates through speech, then there must be some type of speech that is operative. That is to say, that when God speaks things, when God says, let there be light, Yehi Or, it just doesn't do nothing the way that, nothing happened when I said that. It said it in Hebrew. But when God says Yehi Or, well, light pops into existence. And the idea is that there must be some kind of fundamentally metaphysically powerful speech act, and discovering language through which that speech act can be done is a constant thing of interest to pre-modern people, whether it's John Dee or even Augustine and other people. They're very interested in this idea. What's interesting is that it doesn't appear that Hildegard was. Hildegard doesn't. There's no indication in the writing that Hildegard thinks that she's summoning a primordial language. It does seem that the language is coming from a divine source. She definitely says that she didn't invent it, but it's interesting. Hildegard kind of doesn't really tell us much here or there about the nature of the language, but certainly when the angels are talking to John Dee, there's a famous line. I think I forget which angel it is, maybe Michael or Gabriel, one of them, says that every word is a quiddity, that they're speaking in this sort of very scholastic way of talking, that every word is a whatness, which is to say that in the so-called celestial speech, it's not just when you say a word, it's actually the thing itself, and it has operative power. There's this famous sequence when Edward Kelly is reading out loud some of the parts of the Liber Loci, and these spiritual beings show up and start beating him with shovels for whatever reason. And of course, John Dee has to banish them wizard style with a magical wand and everything. And so you have to be careful what you say in the ancient world. And some of these ideas still persist. Taboo replacement is still a thing that people do all the time. And so the idea that language and metaphysics are somehow connected, this is a very, very ancient idea. I would say it's a very common idea. In fact, we are the weird ones who believe that the relationship is arbitrary, as much as we do believe that it is arbitrary. But certainly, yeah, in Dee and other people. In fact, there's a book I want to write about this, specifically in Dee, because I think that Dee really flirts with all kinds of realisms. He really rejects the sort of Occamite position of nominalism, and he introduces several kinds of realisms. And I'd like to write a book exploring the various realisms that appear in the life and works of Dr. Dee.
That sounds like it'd be excellent. And I noticed that obviously it's part and parcel with the territory, but I noticed that there seems to be an interest. You seem to take an interest in that kind of philosophy or magical philosophy of language. Not just with Dee, but also your series on the Agrippa's various theories of mathematics and his system of linguistics and things like that. But I actually saw recently you did a roundtable discussion with Professor Walter Hanegraaff that was for Embassy of the Free Mind.
That was right. That's right. We were in Amsterdam last summer. Been fantastic evening. Real honor to be able to sit across the table from such an absolute titan, a real personal hero of mine, and shoot the breeze, so to speak, on all things Hermetic.
It was very cool to see both of your enthusiasms kind of like bubbling up and in that interaction with one another. There were a lot of points in there, but one of the interesting things that I thought we could talk about. So there's this part where you guys are talking about Ludovico Lazzarelli and really his translation of the Corpus Hermeticum, and how the Ficino de' Medici version, they kind of stopped and didn't publish it because apparently there was some sort of disappointment with it. I thought that was really interesting that it got published later on, and Ludovico Lazzarelli having produced, as you mentioned, in the roundtable discussion, really being complete, having all I think 17 of those texts. But something really struck me when you said that he was like the first person to say, "I am a Hermeticist." So I'm curious. I mean, is that? I know that you can't really boil things down. You can't really pinpoint it. But I mean, is that part of the beginning, or him coining that term or taking on that sort of title? Is that the beginning of Hermeticism as maybe distinct from Hermetism? It seems like an important moment, and I hadn't even heard of it until you mentioned it.
Yeah, most people never read the Crata Hermetis for whatever reason. Well, and it's not for whatever reason. It's an inaccessible translation, and most people have never heard of the original. It's also important to say that in that sentence, right, he says, "Hermeticus sum et Christianus." I am a Hermeticist and a Christian. So it's important to get that whole sentence in there. Yeah, I think it's an important moment, and I would say it's an important moment, not in some sort of decisive break or something like that, but it is an important moment where we have someone identifying as a Hermeticist, and I would say that in some sense really begins modern occultism. That the idea that there is that one can be Christian and still also be this other thing that is kind of pagan and kind of, hidden in a way, quite hidden, in fact. And so I think that it is an important moment in the history of modern occultism because it is at that moment where we see someone self-consciously, very self-consciously combining pagan wisdom and Christianity in the form of some kind of perennial Christianity. And you get some of that in Ficino, although Ficino is very conservative. You get a bit more of that in someone like Pico, although Pico is definitely leaning more heavily in the Kabbalistic direction, magical direction. But yeah, I think that it's one of those flag moments. Now, again, the fact that ancient peoples didn't call themselves Hermeticists, I don't know if that really matters. They would have said something like, "I'm on the way of Hermes." But yeah, it's something interesting. Just like in the Book of Acts, there's that moment where I think in Antioch, someone for the first time refers to themselves as a Christian. I think that those are interesting moments where it's an identity you can have and a set of beliefs that conforms or corresponds to that identity that is interesting. Because prior to that, we never see someone talking in that way.
And that's kind of where I was going with this. But sort of a follow-up question, I think, unless it's presumptuous of me, I assume that, and both of us are people of faith. And what I see in a lot of pockets, not overall, but I see a lot of pockets. There's contention with this idea that you can subscribe to, let's say, lowercase o orthodoxy in terms of a religious view, and then also study things like practice, hermetic ritual or subscribe to the philosophy. Or even Neoplatonism, which I think is ridiculous because Christian theology is in a big way based on a lot of, right. So I'm wondering, like, how do you personally embody these things? I mean, I know you're more of a teacher, but and a student, but I guess from a historical perspective, it wouldn't have been as much of like a dichotomy. They started blending these things because when I tell people I'm a Christian and I'm also an occultist, they look at me like, "What?"
Yeah, I mean, it is a word that is unfortunately has quite a negative connotation. I mean, also we shouldn't forget that Lazzarelli and Ficino were both priests. So not only were they Christians, I mean, they were on the boat. So yeah, I think that syncretizing these beliefs with some kind of orthodoxy, it can be challenging, but that's just true of anything. I don't know how many people do we really know that actually conform 100% to a certain set of dogma. I'd be surprised if the Pope does, frankly. Um, it's just not, human beings are contentious, disagreeable creatures, and that's for the best, actually. So I think there's a range for people experimenting with their beliefs, and insofar as occultist just simply means that one finds spiritual nourishment from what is otherwise hidden in the world or in the spiritual dimensions of a religion. Well, I mean, that's not that, it shouldn't be that shocking. It's just the word that kind of, I think, spooks people for whatever reason. But yeah, there's nothing inherently, when you look at someone like Cornelius Agrippa, I think people are, John Dee, for instance, I think people are often quite shocked about how Christian they are. I think often occultists who sort of get burned by Christianity and turn to occult spiritualities, and when they actually go and read Agrippa, which I think very few people actually read Agrippa, I think he's more celebrated than known. They read it and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is real Christian." I'm like, "It's real Christian. John Dee is real Christian." If you were to take out all the prayers from the angelic conversations, you'd lose probably 30% of that text. And this is the same with Kabbalah. I mean, people are saying, "Well, how do I be a Kabbalist?" I'm like, "Well, become an Orthodox Jew. That's the first step." And they're like, "You have to be an Orthodox Jew." And I'm like, "At least from the Kabbalah, as far as I can see, it's just an assumption that you're living a very Orthodox uh, lifestyle." Now, does that mean that you can't study Kabbalah and even practice some of the aspects of it and find it fruitful and spiritually rewarding and not even be Jewish? I'm sure you can. Plenty of people have. But if we look at these from their traditional valence, I think many people would be shocked to learn just how Christian Agrippa or uh, John Dee and these other kind of folks were strange Christians. But I think once you get under the hood, most people are strange Christians, strange Jews, and strange Muslims. Very few people sort of toe the line, and if they do, they probably do that more for institutional reasons than they do for personal beliefs.
That's a very good point. And I do feel like it's something that does get glossed over, particularly in like the grimoire traditions and things like that. I mean, you were expected to be a priest of some kind, some holy person, in order to be able to wield the authority to command
Mhm.
these often chthonic spirits. You see the same thing in esoteric Taoism. I have a bit of a background in that. Like there's this idea that the Taoist practitioner, in order to properly consecrate things, like they have to have received some sort of ordination, which is interesting to me. But
Yeah, well, certainly true with medieval, like you said, the grimoire tradition. Those people are exorcists.
yeah,
I've made I think I've made a pretty good argument, I think, to say that there is no medieval necromancy without the exorcist priests that existed in the tens of thousands or whatever all through Europe. That's the only people that could have done it. It's not like Olaf the farmer; he could probably a cunning man, but being illiterate and not having access to the kinds of things you would need to actually get those grimoires off the ground, you can be illiterate. You have to learn Latin. You need to learn how to do, like you said, to officiate at certain kinds of things that are typical of the Catholic Church. The only people that fit that bill are priests. And so, yeah, again, we shouldn't be surprised that when you go to look at these grimoires, just how extremely Christian they are. Because what else would they be?
yeah, and as a Christian, particularly a Catholic, I was raised that way. I there's a lot of magic in the like the prayers to saints and stuff like that. Hey, Saint Anthony, I lost something. Like, it's pretty interesting, because what I think a lot of people from outside those traditions don't realize is, like, no, we have our own inner, like, our kind of closed systems of magic. We call it prayer,
Sure.
but
I mean,
um
I tell people, if you want to see an active, if you're like, yeah, I want to get involved in a religion that has theurgy, I'm like, you don't have to become a neo-pagan, just become a Catholic. You can go, I can walk down the street to the local cathedral, and I can watch theurgy every single day, a few times a day. They ring the bells when a miracle happens, and the act of transubstantiation. I'm like, look, if you really want to get involved in a pretty magical religion where you can see miracles happening on the daily, Catholicism is your train. Now, there's all kinds of other problems with Catholicism, but at least in terms of institutional theurgy, a la someone like Iamblichus,
mhm.
the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church are much more on that train than Islam or Judaism. So yeah, it's to me, it's often funny from the outside, not being Catholic or even Christian for that matter, when often Christians. So I know lots of Christian people who, for instance, leave the Catholic Church and become uh, pagans or occultists. I'm like, I don't see a lot of light between you guys. It looks about the same to me. Like, yeah, now you worship Thor and Freya, but you could have had Mary and Mary Magdalene. I'm like, I don't really know how these are all, James the Just there holding his decapitated head and all getting ready for the end of the world. I'm like, Ragnarok, Apocalypse. So, I mean, I don't see a lot of light here, guys.
Yeah. Plus you get to plus it's like, in more of a kind of contemporary living tradition, you get these beautiful spaces to go and witness these things. Although I'm sure a lot of those sort of pagan reconstruction traditions, they do it, um some of them do it in nature, which is just as beautiful.
Sure, of
I'm
course.
I'm curious to know, what are some of the most well, I was going to say egregious, but let me substitute that word with some of the more common misconceptions about Western esotericism, um, from either within the communities or outside of them, that you're kind of that you butt up against, if there are any.
That's a good question. I think anti-Christian bias is pretty endemic, which is really a pity. There's a pretty strong anti-Christian bias, and I think that's born out of religious trauma. It's not unreasonable, but it's unfortunate, just because it bars the door for people really having an appreciation of some of the great mystics that come out of the Christian world, which I love and I find to be rewarding to study. So that's a thing that I often find shocking. I think, of course, from the outside looking in, the big misconception is that occultists are basically devil worshippers or something. Um, that's a pretty endemic one, unfortunately. Um, I think also maybe sort of an odd thing that I notice is the gap between where the academy is in this terms of the study of Western esotericism and sort of where practitioners are. I'm often surprised to learn that a lot of it's a good example. Like misinformation still gets around that has been well debunked now. Like the Yates thesis is still something that people bandy about. That's largely been debunked. The idea that there were, I don't know, 9 million witches burned during the so-called burning times, like that, we know that didn't happen. So it's interesting, sort of like where the breakdowns of communication happen between where the scholarship is and where the practitioners are. Um, I also will say what's been surprising is just how willing scholars and practitioners and people who are both, which for some reason there's a real strange bias in the academic study of Western esotericism, where there's a sense in which being both a practitioner and a scholar is thought of as I don't know, a thing worth naming, this term scholar practitioner, which is bizarre because you would never say that about Gershom Scholem or someone like, yeah,
True.
he's Jewish and he studies Kabbalah, like, whatever. Or, I would never think if I saw a Jesuit who's I don't know, an expert in Loyola or a Dominican expert in Thomas, I would never think to myself, oh, I don't trust them. Like they're up to shenanigans because they have a dog in the fight. I'm like, they're just scholars. And if they're doing good scholarship, then why should we look twice? It's just for me, it's just religious bigotry, frankly, that a practicing occultists get put under a certain kind of lens in a way that other religious people don't. Like I said, I think it's just religious bigotry, frankly. But those are some things that come immediately to mind. I think also one of the things that maybe that people don't really realize in the occult world, especially people coming out of the traditional ceremonial magical world, is just how fraught the manuscript tradition is of many of the classical, the grimoire literature. People will say things like, "Oh, I practice, I don't know, the Key of Solomon," and they'll have a copy of the classic 19th century one. And I'm like, there are 150 manuscripts of that now, and they are all over the place. And it's a mess. It's a textual mess, and there's no critical edition. There's not one coming.
Oh, wow.
There's not even a list anywhere where we even know where all these are at. We just know that there's the best guess is that there's 150, and so just that. So that's one of the things that's how messy the manuscript tradition is with a lot of this literature, and also just the idea that somehow we have it all done, that there's we're kind of done, and now it's just sort of filling in the details. But the truth of the matter is, I literally have 25 projects that if I had graduate students, I would put them on those projects, and they could build an entire career just based on those projects easily. So there is a ton to be done in the study of Western esotericism. We are at the absolute infancy of this field, and 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 I think about this, and sometimes it keeps me up at night, not literally, but I think about it that so much of the work I'm doing on Esoterica is going to be totally outdated in at least a generation. It's going to be like, wow, this stuff is super primitive, and I'm humbled and grateful to hear people say such kind things about it. But as someone who's kind of like climbed up the mountain a little further and kind of can see how much more mountain there is to climb, I look back down and think, oh yeah, we've not hardly. If you think Esoterica is going deep, trust me, what's going to come in the next generation is an absolute deluge. I'll give you one example of this. There's no critical edition of the Corpus Hermeticum. Doesn't exist. There's a good edition, the Copenhagen edition, which we all have on our shelf and we've all dutifully read. It's fantastic. There's no critical edition.
Mm.
There just isn't one. Well, there's about to be one. And that is going to be a tidal wave because the argument that's going to be made in that text is that there are all kinds of interpolations into the Corpus Hermeticum that are not original to the document. And some of those interpolations are very important parts of the text. And whatever it means to be a Hermeticist, some of that is going to ride on how that text gets edited.
Mm.
And it's going to be fascinating. It is a coming tidal wave. And it's going to alter the way that we think about Lazzarelli. It's going to alter the way we think about Agrippa. to all the way we think about Ficino, to all the way we think about Hermeticism of Antiquity. And that's just one book that's about to get re-edited. That's not counting the, again, 150 manuscripts of the Key of Solomon that are out there in the dark that no one has put eyes on. I don't know, since Lynn Thorndike did 100 years ago.
Well, you're making me want to go back to school, man.
I mean, we need, you know, you think about the program in Amsterdam, we need a dozen of those, and we need a dozen of those working full time to even begin to make a dent. And that's just counting European stuff. That's not counting how much it remains in Syriac and Arabic. There's a mountain of Hermetic literature in Arabic that is just sitting in libraries in Aleppo, and no one's going to have that stuff published in our lifetime, I dare say.
Yeah, that's sad.
Very sad.
That's not the first time I've heard that too from an academic. It's not going to happen. So I opened up, you have been consistently one of the most requested people on the show. So I opened up, a forum for some of the Patreon subscribers, to the Arcanum channel to ask, submit some questions, as long as they're on topic. And I got a couple of good ones. And I wanted to maybe talk about those right now.
Sure.
So, and it's kind of a good spot because we're just talking about translations, but someone asks, do you know of any upcoming projects where researchers and academics like yourself are planning to use AI to translate these ancient texts?
I think that in general, academics are slow to want to use AI for translations, for a lot of reasons. Just because a lot of these texts are very technical, and AI does a pretty bad job at technical stuff. It does a pretty good job at like, you know, narrative. It's pretty good at doing that. It's not great at abstract technical stuff. And if you want to see a good example of that, just take a random section of Duns Scotus and throw it in your chat GPT and get it to translate it. You'll get very fascinating hallucinatory nonsense. So I think that scholars generally are pretty skeptical of AI when it comes to material like this. I do believe, and I could be wrong, I do think that Adam McLean, who's runs the big alchemy website, who I'm indebted to enormously, I do think he's putting out some publications that are aided with AI. I could be wrong about that, but I think I remember that being the case. So he's putting out a slew of new alchemy stuff. But yeah, AI's implementation at this point is great for descriptive stuff, narrative stuff. It's not great for philosophical stuff, and it's not great for stuff where the authors are intentionally trying to hide things from you. I mean, a great example of this is Agrippa's Latin. Agrippa has fantastic Latin. He was known for his Latinity throughout his life. He was a bit of a bastard. And when he was a teenager, he would only speak to people in Latin. You know, can you imagine how insufferable Agrippa was? But at any rate, Agrippa's Latin is very, very good, and it's very playful. And, you know, Google Translate just butchers it. And this is why I really appreciate Eric Perdue's translation. It's very careful, because if you were to throw Agrippa into, you know, Google Translate or ChatGPT, you would get trash. And you really need someone, not just who's a competent Latinist. Dan Otrell also is a very competent Latinist and working very hard on getting some of this stuff translated. You need someone who knows the tradition very well, who knows the literature, because you need to know when they're winking and nudging at you, because they're always winking and nudging at you. And if you don't recognize that in the Latin, that this is a half-cribbed quote from Apuleius or something, well, you're going to butcher it when you bring it to English, and you're not going to realize, oh, they're talking on two levels here. AI can't do that, at least not yet.
Interesting. Yeah, and I feel like that's always been a supposition. Like we've always some people have always kind of supposed that there was a lot of play and a lot of writing between the lines in those things. And then you look at something like the Derveni Papyrus, which is, you know, admittedly very fragmentary, but I've been checking out the Richard Janko translation, and it's got a very interesting sort of forward to it, an introduction to it, that basically, you know, the Greek word hierologos, which I speak Greek. I don't speak ancient Greek, but I'm Greek. You know, that means like a priestly word or holy word. And and he uses it almost as to point at somebody who's speaking in allegories.
Right.
And
And that's what the
which,
text is, right? The Divinity Papyrus is a complex allegory on Orphic literature. It's the most
yeah,
fascinating text, I think, is that whole story. So I think that was my favorite episode of Esoterica to make, was the one on the Divinity Papyrus.
yeah, it's fairly, I mean, it's fairly recent, isn't it? The discovery was like 2006 or something.
I forget
Am
when
I
they
off
discovered
base
it.
on that?
I think it was the 70s, maybe they discovered it. I forget. You know, they were widening a road and discovered the tomb. It's just some D&D stuff, if there ever was any. But yeah, the Divinity Papyrus, I think, is one of the most fascinating and least studied texts. Yeah, Yanko's just down the street here in Ann Arbor, so I was talking to him about the text.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's
he's at the
cool.
University of Michigan.
That's cool. The next question that we got from somebody was, is there anything you personally are hopeful that we will find if and when a clearer picture of how our ancestors related and experienced the mysteries comes to light?
Good question. One a book I can talk to a book I recently read, and an episode that will eventually get formed is the scholars are working together now in a way that they didn't even 10 years ago. And one of the coolest projects that I've seen in recent times was a scholars of religion, theologians, archaeologists, just anthropologists, all got together at the site of Çatalhöyük. You know, this is a very early Neolithic site, and they worked on site for 3 years. So you have theologians with a spade at the site, working at the site. And over the 3 years, they came away and said, "All right, what do we think is going on in the spirituality of these Neolithic people?" And they disagree a lot. The book that was originally published is a multidisciplinary book with, again, theologians and archaeologists and all kinds of people. And what you kind of get is a bit of a gestalt of what might Neolithic spirituality would have looked like. And they've done something similar with cave paintings at like Chauvet Cave and the big caves in the south of France and other places. And they've done something similar. And there's a great book on this called Inside the Neolithic Mine, another called Inside the Paleolithic Mine. The Mine Inside the Cave, I think is the name of it. And I think that we're in a point now where the siloization of academic sectors is breaking down. And as that siloization breaks down, academics are working together, talking across lines. And I think that's incredibly fruitful. And so I'm looking forward to the day where I can sit across the table from an archaeologist and say, all right, let's take an archaeological site. Let's take religious studies people, some other people, and let's sort of try to figure out what's going on. And I think that's very hopeful. So I don't know what big discoveries will be made. I mean, no one expected us to find Göbekli Tepe when we did. It's just utterly altered the landscape of the under our understanding of human religion completely. 40 years ago, if you would ask someone, "Hey, would you have a large scale temple structure prior to 5000 BCE?" They say, "Absolutely not. Of course not. That's a part of urbanization. That's going to happen uniquely in the south, the south part of Mesopotamia." And they'd have been right archaeologically. And then we find Göbekli Tepe, which pushes that date back 5,000 more years. So I'm confident that new discoveries will be made. I'm also confident that new things will show up in Egypt. The desert's always giving up something there. And so I think in our lifetime, there'll be more Gnostic texts found. There have been some in our lifetime already. So I think that there'll be more found. And also, the stuff that's out there, people don't really, I think, appreciate the crazy stuff that's out there. I'll give one example of this. A pretty famous scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls was shown a microfilm of a complete copy of the Book of Enoch in Aramaic that was looted probably from the Dead Sea Scroll site, probably in the 50s, and it was shown to him by a guy in Kuwait. After Saddam had been kicked out of Kuwait, he was basically trying to use it as collateral. He had turncoated and teamed up with Saddam, and when the Americans threw Saddam out, well, he didn't want to be in Kuwait having turncoated his own country. So he was trying to basically use this Aramaic copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls to get him a ticket out of Kuwait. And no one knows exactly what happened. Well, there's probably an Aramaic copy of the Book of Enoch out there that's sitting in a lockbox, or God knows where it is. And if we could get our hands on that, it would transform our understanding of Enochic Judaism. So there's a lot out there, and I'm sure there's a lot coming. And I'm definitely not one of these people that has, well, we have it all figured out. We found everything. That's The man who proclaims out on the hill will die on that hill.
Well said. So the next topic I kind of wanted to roll into is a big one for me. I know when I first started watching your channel, I was really intrigued. Well, first of all, the quality of the production is excellent. But I kept asking myself, boy, I wonder what he actually thinks of this stuff. Ostensibly you're a person of faith. I think that you're pretty open about that, and your treatment of these topics is certainly, I would say, academic, with a good amount of humor, which I truly appreciate. But where do you think belief fits into this equation? Because obviously the people that we study were people of belief.
So I think that it works. It cuts in two ways. Myself, I'm not a believer. I'm religious, but I'm not a spiritual person. I'm a very boring materialist. I tell people I have the most boring metaphysics you can imagine. It's like I believe in 25 particles and 4 forces as much as gravity is a force. Yeah, I have a very boring and very uninteresting belief system, which is, I always tell people, why anyone would be interested in what I believe is beyond me. I don't even care what I believe. But I think that that belief can cut two ways. One, belief can bias us. It can bias us in directions and where we go looking for the things we want to believe, and we put all of our energy in the things that we really want to believe, and that's the confirmation bias on amok, and you can see that anywhere you turn. I think the other side of it that is equally unfortunate is where disbelief becomes disrespect. And I see a lot of people who do not believe, for instance, in these topics like that I'm covering, esotericism or whatever, and they look down their nose at them as backwards or superstitious or whatever Reddit atheist stuff people would say about it. And I think neither of those positions are comfortable for me. That is to say, I don't have a bias in any of this. I mean, of course, I have some things I'm interested in. I'm more interested in, I don't know, John Dees than I am Aleister Crowley. So, that's just a bias of mine. I'm more interested there than there. I'm very uninterested in stuff basically that happened after about 1850. My interest drops off dramatically. But not to say that stuff's not interesting. It's just where I land in terms of my own personal interest. Stuff's fabulously interesting, very important to be studied. But at the same time, I really don't like when people mock and dismiss this material. And so the position that I've always taken on the channel is that I'm going to steelman it, which is to say I'm going to give every topic I study the best possible presentation and the best possible representation that I can, regardless of what I believe. Because they deserve this. The material deserves it. And if I go into the material, even a belief system, I don't know, that I deeply dislike, really, Gnosticism. I really find dualism to be a, I don't know, pernicious belief. I'm disconvinced of it, and I think it's pernicious. A world-hating belief system is, I think, very dangerous, actually. But when I go to teach about the Apocryphon of John, I'm going to give it the best presentation that I can, because it deserves to give it the best presentation that I can. So I think that belief, whether in the material or disbelief and agitation with the material, I think can be both bad. They can both be bad. That one can bias us in the direction of what we want to believe, and the other can bias us in the direction of disbelief becoming disrespect. And I hope, and I'm sure I'll fail at it. Of course, I'll fail at it because no one's perfect, not even remotely perfect. But I hope, insofar as I'm able to, that Esoterica will always try to maintain a balance of both being as sympathetic to the material as possible, but also maintaining a critical eye. And having a critical eye with a deep degree of sympathy, to me, allows me to steelman the material, but at the same time, never be credulous and never have to believe in any of this stuff. And again, I have people who I would consider friends in the community of practitioners, and I've always told them, look, if I ever cross the line into the direction of being disrespectful, I want you to let me know, and I want to apologize for it, and I want to make it right, because I never want to insult anyone's religious beliefs and their spiritual path. But on the other hand, I have an obligation to tell the truth. And some of those truths aren't pleasant, and some of them contradict what people want to believe. And some people get really angry about that with me. But there's nothing I can do. I can't change history. So, yeah, there's a lot of, sometimes I feel like a bit of a ping pong ball being hit and being pushed and knocked in a lot of different directions. But hopefully the end result is that I somehow balance being very sympathetic to the material and very sympathetic, of course, to practitioners of the material, but also being critical in a way that that is rigorous and intellectually honest.
And that's refreshing to hear. One of the things that I just want to mention, I appreciate the dose of humility that you have in not kind of being at a loss for words as to why somebody would care what you believe, but it's like I see some sort of reflection of people like you and I who are very interested in these characters, very interested in the personalities of the people like John Dee and things like that, other people like that, Hildegard von Bingen, and their personalities really draw us to them, I think, and the things that they study as well. But everything kind of comes through a filter. It's their expression of this material or these ideas, and I think that can be very beautiful. And obviously I can, just from what you've said, right, I mean, that's your expression, that's your treatment of this material, that's literally what you're offering to historical communities, academic communities in the future. So I think there's something to be said about that. And then on the other hand, I found people who like to sort of operate under the pretense that they're agnostic. I know very few people who are truly agnostic. Most people believe something. Mm-hmm. And as you kind of pointed to earlier, today's wisdom is most often, tomorrow's folly. So it's very interesting to me to see that, particularly in practitioner communities. I expect it in academia, because that is an environment where, like, okay, this is specifically what we do. Specifically, this is the way we approach this material. These are the rules of engagement. And it's a necessity for that kind of exegetical treatment and transmission of that stuff, telling the truth. But you do see every once in a while people in the communities that scoff at others' beliefs. It's like, well, you're doing a whole lot of wand waving yourself. So it's
Yes, I see this in religion. That people who I see people make fun of Wiccans or make fun of occultists or whatever. I'm like, yeah, you also believe that like a snake tricked a woman, and now everyone has to, believe in a resurrected rabbi, or you believe that some guy went up on a mountain and got a bunch of rules about what you can and can't eat. Like, when you begin to do that sort of religious expose, where people believe this nonsense, I'm like, well, at the end of the day, it all looks pretty weird from a significant enough distance. And I think just being comfortable with the fact that that what works for you, and that doesn't entitle you to an intellectual or spiritual imperialism. I like Judaism, and I don't expect anyone to be Jewish. Like, in fact, we have a tradition of like shooing people away when they want to convert. Why would you do that? That's a terrible idea. And it's funny. My wife is a rabbi, and we've had people want to convert to Judaism, and they come to me, sort of when in a one-on-one meeting, and I'm like, no, you should go back to your tradition. Your tradition has like, great, you have Hildegard of Bingen. You guys have her. Go back to being Catholic. They're like, are you shooing me away? I'm like,
yeah, but you guys have Honi the Circle Maker.
We do have Honi the Circle Maker. Yeah, it's my wife's favorite rabbi. So yeah, it's, to me, I think that if we all were a bit more humble, a lot less of us would get hurt. And I think that that in cultivating that humility, both spiritually, but also cultivating that humility intellectually, where me being a scholar of this material does not give me the right to judge anyone's spiritual beliefs, one, and two, it doesn't give me the right to impose some kind of like metaphysical judgment on it. And I think that sometimes academics get on their high horse where they think, well, I know a lot about the history and blah, blah, blah of all this stuff, and therefore I can diagnose its value. Now, that's not a move you get to make, academics. Sorry. It's not a move I get to make. And so it's not for me to make value judgments, at least publicly. I can say what I want to believe privately, and someone can ask me what I believe about Gnosticism. I can say I don't think it's a healthy belief system because of blah, 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 blah. But But if I meet a person who subscribes to Gnosticism, I'm going to try to understand them and not judge them, and have a conversation around how they came to these beliefs and how these beliefs matter to them, and etc. So I think that intellectual humility is also a virtue that academics could do a bit better job of
Yeah,
working on.
I think it's interesting too. I have loved seeing your kind of relationship with Aaron Leach as well. Um, the you're both scholars, but he's much more of a practitioner. He's like that's kind of how he came up. Um, but there's kind of there's always, as you're saying, right? I think that's a really good point. That might be the first time I've kind of processed it that way, having heard you say if we were humble, a lot less people would get hurt. And I think a lot of that also has to do with like, well, if I'm choosing to be humble, then I'm also this thing that is triggering me might not hurt me as much, which is so it kind of goes like both ways. But there's kind of grumblings from academic, or I would say practitioner communities rather, talking about how like this stuff was basically poo-pooed for years and we practiced it and we wrote books about it, and now there's kind of this academic thing happening where there's an explosion. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great thing, right? Because like you were saying earlier, like a lot of those communities, yeah, they wrote books, but it's just like complete credulity. It's kind of not great information all the time. It's some of it, some really bad stuff snuck in. But where where do you really see practitioners and academics coming together? I mean, do you see at a certain point, you were talking about that kind of roundtable discussion between archaeologists and maybe anthropologists and maybe historians. Do you ever see a place at that table for a practitioner?
Of course, definitely. I think that if a practitioner's not at that table, then the table has something wrong with it. It's a table missing a very important leg. Yeah, I think that, and there's a new organization that's out now called RINCEP that is in fact doing the work of bridging scholars and practitioners together. Yeah, that's why I love reaching out to folks like Aaron and Marco Visconti and other folks to get their input on. I can cover the history and I can cover the linguistic stuff and I can get into the nitty gritty of the manuscript tradition, but the doing of it, I don't have any expertise there. I just don't. And there's knowledge that you can only get through having done it. And I think that's an important facet of the jewel of knowledge. And anyone who wants to pretend otherwise is delusional, frankly. And so, yeah, I think it's very important that there be space for those conversations, and those conversations be cherished, and that practitioners, yeah, again, any table where we're having development of knowledge about this material and practitioners aren't invited is a pretty crappy table, in my opinion. And again, I think that we have to have what I would refer to as epistemological flexibility. And epistemological flexibility is the idea that we need to be flexible in terms of what counts as knowledge, depending on the space that we're in. Esoterica, as I run it, is a completely academic space. However, I'm also willing to be flexible and bend those academic rules a little bit, because I think there are important perspectives that need to be brought on board, specifically practitioner perspectives. But I need to be clear about when I'm doing that. And I think that what we have to do is make sure that we're doing all of this, but also really making it clear what we're doing it, when we're doing it, how we're doing it, what our methodologies are. Because otherwise the water can get very muddy very fast. And I think for me, what matters is bringing those conversations in and have those voices being heard, and at the same time saying, all right, look, that's one sandbox. And these kind of conversations are possible because we've changed the rules so they work in that sandbox. But if we move back to this sandbox, not going to work anymore. Mm-hmm. And just being clear that you're sandboxing certain kinds of things. And I think that's totally possible. And I think that maybe academics have been afraid of it. Well, there's two reasons I think academics have been afraid of doing this. The first reason is because the field of Western esotericism is a baby. And this field has been looked down upon there's a reason why I can't get a job. I can get 500,000 subscribers on YouTube and not get a university job. It's because they think that basically what I'm doing is Hogwarts or something. So the academy doesn't trust academics who work in this material. And academics worry that if they get too close to practitioners, then we'll get even further away from the academy, and the academy will kick us back to the curb. So I think that's one anxiety. I think the other anxiety that is important is that respectability. It's just that academics want to be thought of as academics, and they don't want to be confused with practitioners, even if they are practitioners. They're still in the so-called broom closet, and I think that that's unfair because that's just the reality of academic bigotry. As I mentioned earlier, there's just a lot of bigotry, religious bigotry against occultists in the academic world. And I think that kind of academic bigotry needs to be called out. It needs to be called out by people like me. I'm not an occultist, but if I ever see that kind of academic bigotry, I call it out as such, because or religious bigotry. Because if someone did that to me as a Jew, it'd be anti-Semitism as long as the day is long. It'd be clear what that was, and it would not fly. And yet it flies when it comes to so-called occult religious beliefs, and it's simply wrong.
That's it's just very refreshing to hear that you have a very balanced perspective and take on all this stuff. And I know that, you know, you've said it elsewhere, but I think that my audience will be very appreciative of a lot of the ground that we've covered today. And who knows, maybe they'll like your show even more.
Well, I'm glad that people like the Esoterica. I'm just like, thrilled and humbled that the channel's been successful in the way that it is, and I hope to continue growing it. And again, I hope to continue growing it with an eye to know that a lot of my audience are practitioners, and I really want I want the channel. I want the channel, and I'm absolutely humbled that the channel is a resource for people's spiritual journeys. It's just, I mean, it's incredibly important to me, and it means a ton to me.
So I've got just a final question that I ask everybody. It's kind of a canned question, but yours, I think I can sort of focus in on a little bit more. 3 essential books. I know this might be tough, but like for summer reading, Western Esotericism 100 level course, summer reading, 3 books.
3 books. Wow. This is like, it's gonna be possible. 3 books.
As many as you want, then.
No, then I'll be, that's the other problem. I'd rather have the 3 problem, 50 problem. I think just sort of essential books, Walter Hanegraaff's Western Esotericism, A Guide to the Perplexed, which he's republishing, by the way. He's totally redoing it.
Oh,
but
wow.
I'd say that's it's I don't know when it's coming out, but he and I were talking about it. So I would say that Walter Hanegraaff's Guide to the Perplexed for Western Esotericism is a great starting place. Just the bibliography alone for that book is worth its weight in gold. So that's the first book. So it's more of an academic book. I think you got to do Agrippa. I think you have to do Agrippa's 3 books. So I'd recommend the Eric Purdue translation for that. If you have Latin, I would highly recommend also having a Latin nearby. So I think you have to do some Agrippa, because he's just so foundational for everything that follows, and he's such a summation of everything that came before. So he's certainly quintessential in that way. Third book, sort of like quintessential stuff. Look at my own shelf and see what I would pick out. Probably Gershom Scholem's book on Kabbalah, just the standard blue book on Kabbalah. I think that you need some background in Kabbalah, and his blue book, the blue book, the sort of intro to Kabbalah book, is probably the best still. I mean, in many ways. So if you're going to do some Kabbalah, it would probably be that one. It's dated and it needs to be updated, but it's still a solid read. If you'd ask me this question in 15 minutes, I'd give you a totally different answer, probably. That's what's funny about it, though. It's like sort of what you pull out of the gate.
Yep.
Yeah, the Nag Hammadi library. Again, it all depends on, do you want to do primary sources? Do you want to do secondary literature? But I always tell people, if you're interested in Western esotericism and you want to get a first contact book, Wouter's Guide to the Perplexed is what I would throw at people. And I would say that just following the bibliography in that book good. That's a lifetime worth of learning right there.
Great. Well, Dr. Sledge, thank you so much. This has been a privilege to talk with you. I am looking forward to everything else that you've got lined up for us in the future. Thanks for being here.
I appreciate that, Ike. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you to the audience for listening.